Question 1. Quality control measures reveal that a PFPA police officer on patrol at Fort Meade observes an individual pacing erratically near a restricted access point, speaking loudly to themselves and appearing agitated. The officer is approximately 50 yards away. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer to take to assess the risk? Option A. Radio for backup and wait for additional units to arrive before making any approach or attempt at communication. Option B. Approach the individual cautiously, maintain a safe distance, observe their behavior for further indicators, and attempt to initiate non-confrontational communication to ascertain their purpose and well-being. Option C. Immediately draw their service weapon and issue verbal commands for the individual to stop and submit to apprehension, assuming a potential threat. Option D. Continue with their patrol route, assuming the individual is not an immediate threat and is merely experiencing a personal issue. The correct answer is B. Approach the individual cautiously, maintain a safe distance, observe their behavior for further indicators, and attempt to initiate non-confrontational communication to ascertain their purpose and well-being. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the PFPA police officer to balance immediate security needs with the potential for escalation and the need for thorough, unbiased information gathering. Misjudging the situation could lead to unnecessary force, compromised investigations, or a failure to address the actual threat. The officer must exercise sound judgment under pressure, adhering to established protocols for risk assessment and threat management within the PFPA operational environment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a systematic, multifaceted risk assessment that prioritizes de-escalation and information gathering, while maintaining a secure perimeter. This includes observing the individual's behavior for indicators of distress or intent, attempting non-confrontational communication to understand the situation, and coordinating with other PFPA personnel for support and intelligence. This approach aligns with PFPA directives on threat assessment and incident response, emphasizing the preservation of life and property through informed decision-making rather than immediate, potentially excessive, action. It allows for a nuanced understanding of the situation, enabling a response proportionate to the assessed threat level. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately assuming hostile intent and initiating a forceful apprehension without attempting to gather more information or de-escalate. This violates PFPA guidelines that mandate a graduated response and a thorough assessment of the threat before employing force. It risks unnecessary escalation, potential injury to the individual or officers, and could lead to a false apprehension if the individual was experiencing a medical emergency or was disoriented. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual's presence and continue with routine patrols, deeming them not an immediate threat. This fails to acknowledge the potential for a developing threat and neglects the PFPA responsibility to maintain security and investigate suspicious activity. It represents a failure in proactive risk assessment and could leave the facility vulnerable to unforeseen dangers. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on the initial visual assessment without attempting any form of communication or further observation. This is insufficient for a comprehensive risk assessment. PFPA protocols require officers to gather as much information as possible to make an informed decision, and a single observation may not capture the full context of the individual's behavior or intentions. Professional reasoning. When faced with an unknown individual exhibiting unusual behavior within a sensitive area, PFPA police officers should employ a decision-making process that begins with observation and situational awareness. This is followed by an attempt at non-confrontational communication to gather information and assess intent. If communication is not possible or effective, the officer should then consider the need for additional resources and a more structured approach to secure the individual and the area, always prioritizing de-escalation and proportionate response based on a continuously updated risk assessment. Question 2. The control framework reveals that PFPA police officers in Arlington, Virginia, are tasked with assessing potential security vulnerabilities. Which of the following approaches best aligns with established risk assessment principles for federal installations, considering the multifaceted nature of modern threats? Option A. Focusing exclusively on visible, immediate physical security threats and deferring assessment of cyber or insider threats to specialized units. Option B. relying on informal observations and anecdotal reports from personnel to identify and evaluate security risks. Option C, prioritizing the assessment of only those threats that have historically resulted in incidents at similar federal installations. Option D, conducting a systematic identification of potential threats, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and evaluating existing controls, while also considering physical, insider, and cyber vulnerabilities. The correct answer is D, conducting a systematic identification of potential threats, analyzing their likelihood and impact, and evaluating existing controls, while also considering physical, insider, and cyber vulnerabilities. Explanation: the control framework reveals the critical need for proactive risk assessment in maintaining security at a federal installation like the Pentagon. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing immediate operational needs with long-term security vulnerabilities, demanding a nuanced judgment that prioritizes the safety of personnel and assets. A failure to adequately assess risks can lead to compromised security postures, increased susceptibility to threats, and potential breaches of sensitive information or physical access. The best approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that systematically identifies potential threats, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and evaluates existing controls. This includes considering a wide range of factors such as physical security vulnerabilities, insider threats, cyber threats, and the potential for external attacks. By employing a structured methodology, such as that outlined in the Department of Defense's risk management frameworks and relevant PFPA directives, security personnel can prioritize mitigation efforts and allocate resources effectively. This proactive stance ensures that security measures are not only reactive, but also strategically designed to counter evolving threats, aligning with the PFPA mandate to protect its personnel, installations, and operations. An approach that focuses solely on immediate, visible threats without considering less obvious or emerging risks is professionally unacceptable. This narrow focus fails to address potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited by sophisticated adversaries. It also represents an ethical failure to uphold the highest standards of duty of care owed to those protected by the PFPA. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to rely exclusively on historical data without incorporating predictive analysis or intelligence on current threat landscapes. While past incidents provide valuable lessons, they do not fully capture the dynamic nature of modern security challenges. This can lead to a false sense of security and an inability to adapt to new or evolving threats, violating the principle of continuous improvement in security protocols. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established risk assessment protocols or relies on anecdotal evidence rather than systematic evaluation is also unacceptable. This undermines the integrity of the security framework and can lead to inconsistent or ineffective security measures. It demonstrates a lack of professional discipline and a disregard for established best practices and regulatory requirements designed to ensure comprehensive security. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the PFPA mission and the specific assets and personnel they are tasked with protecting. This should be followed by a thorough review of relevant directives, policies, and threat intelligence. The risk assessment process should be iterative, involving continuous monitoring, evaluation, and adaptation of security measures based on new information and changing circumstances. Collaboration with other security agencies and stakeholders is also crucial for a holistic understanding of the threat environment. Question 3. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to enhance perimeter security at a PFPA facility in Maryland. As a PFPA police officer tasked with conducting a risk assessment for proposed new security measures, which approach best balances the need for enhanced security with the operational realities and well-being of PFPA personnel. Option A. Implement security measures based solely on an assessment of external threats, without considering internal operational impacts or personnel feedback. Option B. Adopt security measures based on the assumption that any perceived inconvenience to personnel is an acceptable trade-off for enhanced security. Option C. Rely exclusively on historical security incident data to inform the risk assessment without updating it for current operational realities. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that actively solicits and integrates feedback from all affected PFPA personnel regarding potential operational impacts and morale considerations. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that actively solicits and integrates feedback from all affected PFPA personnel regarding potential operational impacts and morale considerations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires PFPA police officers to balance the immediate need for security with the potential for unintended negative consequences on personnel morale and operational efficiency. The risk assessment process, as mandated by PFPA directives and federal guidelines for law enforcement agencies, demands a thorough evaluation of all potential impacts, not just immediate threats. Failure to consider the broader implications can lead to policies that are technically compliant but practically detrimental, eroding trust and hindering the agency's overall mission. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a comprehensive risk assessment that actively solicits and integrates feedback from all affected stakeholders, including PFPA personnel, who will be directly impacted by the new security measures. This approach aligns with PFPA commitment to operational effectiveness and personnel welfare, as outlined in internal policy documents emphasizing collaborative problem-solving and the importance of human factors in security planning. By engaging with the workforce, officers can identify potential operational disruptions, morale issues, and unintended consequences that might be overlooked in a top-down assessment. This collaborative method ensures that security measures are not only effective against threats, but also practical and sustainable within the PFPA environment, fostering a sense of shared responsibility and buy-in. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing security measures based solely on an assessment of external threats, without considering internal operational impacts or personnel feedback, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects PFPA internal directives that mandate a holistic risk assessment, which includes evaluating the impact on personnel and operations. The risks creating security protocols that are overly burdensome, impractical, or perceived as unfair, leading to decreased morale and potential workarounds that undermine security. Adopting security measures based on the assumption that any perceived inconvenience to personnel is an acceptable trade-off for enhanced security is also professionally unacceptable. This overlooks the ethical obligation to treat personnel with respect and to implement measures that are proportionate to the identified risks. PFPA policy emphasizes a balanced approach, not one that prioritizes security at the expense of personnel well-being without due consideration. Relying exclusively on historical security incident data, without updating the assessment to reflect current operational realities or emerging threats, is a failure to conduct a dynamic and relevant risk assessment. PFPA requires proactive and adaptive security planning, which means continuously evaluating and updating risk assessments based on the most current information and intelligence. This approach can lead to outdated and ineffective security measures. Professional reasoning. PFPA police officers should employ a structured risk assessment framework that begins with identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities. This framework must then incorporate a robust stakeholder engagement process, actively seeking input from all relevant parties, particularly those who will be directly affected by proposed security changes. The assessment should analyze the potential impact of proposed measures on operational efficiency, personnel morale, and overall mission effectiveness. Finally, decisions should be based on a balanced consideration of threat mitigation, operational feasibility, and the welfare of PFPA personnel, ensuring that security measures are both effective and sustainable. Question 4. System analysis indicates a recent, minor security breach at a Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA, controlled access point. Considering the need for enhanced security protocols in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, what is the most appropriate initial step for a PFPA police officer to take to address potential vulnerabilities? Option A. Propose increased patrols and physical barriers around all perimeter fences based on the isolated incident. Option B. Immediately recommend the installation of advanced biometric scanners at all access points to prevent future unauthorized entries. Option C. Initiate a comprehensive risk assessment to identify all potential threats, analyze their likelihood and impact, and evaluate existing security measures before proposing any new protocols. Option D. Suggest implementing a new intelligence-gathering protocol focused solely on monitoring known extremist groups operating in the region. The correct answer is C. Initiate a comprehensive risk assessment to identify all potential threats, analyze their likelihood and impact, and evaluate existing security measures before proposing any new protocols. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the PFPA police officer to balance immediate security needs with the potential for unintended consequences and the need for thorough, systematic evaluation. Rushing to a conclusion based on limited information could lead to an ineffective or even counterproductive security measure, potentially compromising the very safety it aims to enhance. The dynamic nature of security threats at a federal installation like the Pentagon necessitates a measured and analytical approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that systematically identifies potential threats, analyzes their likelihood and impact, and evaluates existing controls before proposing new measures. This approach aligns with the core principles of risk management mandated by federal security directives and best practices for law enforcement agencies. It ensures that security decisions are data-driven, proportionate to the identified risks, and consider all relevant factors, including operational impact and resource allocation. This methodical process allows for the development of effective and efficient security strategies that address vulnerabilities without creating new ones. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing a new surveillance system solely based on a recent, isolated incident without a broader analysis of threat patterns or the effectiveness of existing systems is a failure to conduct a proper risk assessment. This reactive approach can lead to misallocation of resources and may not address the root causes of vulnerabilities. It bypasses the critical step of evaluating the likelihood and impact of various threats beyond the single incident. Adopting a high-tech solution without first assessing whether existing security protocols are being fully utilized, or if simpler, more cost-effective measures could mitigate the identified risks, represents a failure in proportionate response. This approach prioritizes technology over a holistic evaluation of security posture and can result in unnecessary expenditure and complexity. Focusing exclusively on the perceived threat from a specific group without considering other potential adversaries or vulnerabilities demonstrates a narrow and potentially biased risk assessment. This can lead to overlooking critical security gaps and an incomplete understanding of the overall threat landscape. It fails to adopt a comprehensive and objective view of potential risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured risk assessment framework. This involves defining the scope of the assessment, identifying assets and potential threats, analyzing the likelihood and impact of those threats, evaluating existing controls, determining residual risk, and recommending appropriate mitigation strategies. This process should be iterative and adaptable to changing circumstances, ensuring that security measures remain relevant and effective. Question 5. Quality control measures reveal that a Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA police officer stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland, observes an individual loitering near a restricted access point, exhibiting nervous behavior, and repeatedly checking a worn backpack. The officer has no specific intelligence indicating this individual is a direct threat, but the behavior is unusual for the location and time. Considering PFPA directives on risk assessment and Maryland law, which of the following represents the most appropriate initial course of action for the officer? Option A. Disregard the individual as not posing an immediate threat and continue with routine patrols. Option B. Initiate a base-wide security alert and request additional units to surround the area due to the potential threat. Option C. Immediately detain the individual and conduct a full search of the backpack based on the perceived suspicious behavior. Option D. Approach the individual to conduct a non-confrontational inquiry, observe their behavior more closely, and assess the contents of the backpack based on articulable suspicion. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual to conduct a non-confrontational inquiry, observe their behavior more closely, and assess the contents of the backpack based on articulable suspicion. Explanation. The scenario presents a challenge for a Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA police officer in Maryland, requiring a nuanced application of risk assessment principles within the specific legal and operational context of federal law enforcement operating on federal property. The officer must balance the immediate need for security with the rights and freedoms of individuals, all while adhering to PFPA directives and relevant Maryland and federal statutes. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying risk assessment protocols to a situation that is not immediately indicative of a clear and present danger, but rather a potential for future disruption or threat. This requires a judgment call that avoids overreach while ensuring adequate security. The best approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment that prioritizes observable behaviors and credible intelligence, rather than assumptions or generalized profiling. This approach aligns with PFPA directives on threat assessment and Maryland law concerning reasonable suspicion and probable cause. By focusing on specific, articulable facts and employing established assessment tools, the officer can justify any subsequent actions taken, ensuring they are both lawful and operationally sound. This method promotes accountability and minimizes the risk of violating individual rights or exceeding the agency's authority. An approach that relies on generalized suspicion or stereotypes is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the legal standard for reasonable suspicion, which requires specific, articulable facts. Such an approach could lead to discriminatory practices, eroding public trust and potentially violating constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. Furthermore, it deviates from PFPA emphasis on objective threat assessment. Another unacceptable approach is to ignore the situation entirely due to a lack of immediate, overt threat. This neglects the proactive nature of security and risk assessment, potentially allowing a developing threat to materialize. PFPA mission includes preventing incidents, not just responding to them. Failing to assess a potentially concerning situation, even if not immediately dangerous, represents a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the agency's protective mandate. Finally, an approach that involves immediate escalation to a full-scale security lockdown without a graduated assessment is also professionally unsound. While security is paramount, disproportionate responses can create unnecessary disruption, inconvenience, and can be perceived as an overreaction, potentially undermining the agency's credibility. A graduated response, informed by a thorough risk assessment, is more appropriate and efficient. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with information gathering and analysis. This involves identifying all available facts, assessing their credibility, and evaluating them against established risk assessment criteria. The next step is to consider potential courses of action, weighing their effectiveness, legality, and ethical implications. Finally, the chosen course of action should be documented and its effectiveness reviewed. This systematic process ensures that decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with both legal requirements and agency policy. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA Police Department in Arlington, Virginia, needs to enhance its approach to identifying and prioritizing potential security risks to its facilities and personnel. Which of the following methods best aligns with a comprehensive and proactive risk assessment framework for this federal law enforcement agency? Option A. A systematic process that integrates current intelligence, identifies critical assets and vulnerabilities, analyzes potential threat scenarios and their likelihood, and evaluates the potential impact of successful attacks, leading to a prioritized list of risks for mitigation. Option B. A review of past incident reports to identify recurring patterns and focus mitigation efforts on threats that have historically caused the most disruption. Option C. A resource-driven evaluation that prioritizes risks based on the availability of existing security measures and personnel, rather than a thorough analysis of potential threats and vulnerabilities. Option D. An assessment based primarily on the perceived visibility and sensationalism of potential threats, regardless of their statistical likelihood or actual impact. The correct answer is A. A systematic process that integrates current intelligence, identifies critical assets and vulnerabilities, analyzes potential threat scenarios and their likelihood, and evaluates the potential impact of successful attacks, leading to a prioritized list of risks for mitigation. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate the risk assessment process for the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA, Police Department in Arlington, Virginia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational readiness with resource allocation, ensuring that potential threats are identified and mitigated without unduly hindering legitimate activities. The PFPA operates within a unique environment, necessitating a risk assessment that is both comprehensive and adaptable to evolving security landscapes, all while adhering to federal regulations and departmental policies governing law enforcement operations on federal property. The best approach involves a systematic, multifaceted risk assessment that integrates intelligence gathering, vulnerability analysis, and impact evaluation. This method ensures that all potential threats are considered, from insider threats to external attacks, and that the likelihood and potential consequences of each threat are thoroughly analyzed. By prioritizing risks based on this analysis, the PFPA can allocate resources effectively to implement appropriate protective measures, such as enhanced surveillance, personnel training, and procedural changes. This aligns with the principles of proactive security management and the legal mandates to protect federal facilities and personnel, as outlined in relevant federal statutes and Department of Defense directives. An approach that focuses solely on historical incident data is insufficient because it may not account for emerging threats or changes in the operational environment. Relying only on readily available resources overlooks potential vulnerabilities that require proactive identification and mitigation, failing to meet the comprehensive nature of security risk assessment. An approach that prioritizes high-visibility threats without considering their actual likelihood or potential impact can lead to misallocation of resources, diverting attention and funding from more probable or damaging risks. This reactive stance is contrary to best practices in risk management and could leave critical areas unprotected. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. This should be followed by systematic threat identification, vulnerability assessment, and consequence analysis. The results should then be used to prioritize risks and develop appropriate mitigation strategies, which are then implemented and continuously monitored and reviewed. This iterative process ensures that the risk assessment remains relevant and effective in a dynamic security environment. Question 7. Quality control measures reveal that a PFPA police officer on patrol at a Pentagon facility has observed an individual acting suspiciously near a restricted access point, exhibiting behavior that suggests they may have gained unauthorized access or are attempting to do so. The individual is carrying a nondescript bag. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the PFPA police officer in this situation? Adhering to the regulatory framework governing PFPA operations in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Option A. Secure the individual and the immediate area, then immediately notify PFPA investigative authorities and relevant security command personnel to initiate a controlled response and investigation. Option B. Immediately detain the individual and conduct a full interrogation regarding their presence and the contents of the bag, without involving PFPA investigative authorities. Option C. Observe the individual from a safe distance and await further instructions from a supervisor without taking any immediate action to secure the area or the individual. Option D. Confront the individual aggressively, demanding immediate answers and threatening arrest if cooperation is not immediate, before securing the scene or notifying other authorities. The correct answer is A. Secure the individual and the immediate area, then immediately notify PFPA investigative authorities and relevant security command personnel to initiate a controlled response and investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a PFPA police officer to balance immediate security needs with the potential for escalation and the need for thorough, unbiased information gathering. The officer must act decisively to protect personnel and assets, while simultaneously ensuring that their actions do not compromise the integrity of an investigation or violate established protocols for handling sensitive information and potential threats within a federal installation. The presence of a potentially compromised individual in a secure area necessitates a careful risk assessment that considers both immediate danger and long-term implications. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted approach that prioritizes immediate safety while initiating a controlled information gathering process. This includes securing the individual and the immediate area to prevent further compromise or escape, then immediately notifying the appropriate PFPA investigative authorities and relevant security personnel. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental duty of a PFPA police officer to maintain security and order, as outlined in PFPA directives and federal law enforcement guidelines concerning the protection of critical infrastructure and personnel. Promptly involving specialized investigative units ensures that the situation is handled by personnel with the expertise to conduct a thorough and legally sound investigation, minimizing the risk of evidence contamination or procedural errors. This also adheres to the principle of de-escalation where possible, by bringing in the correct resources rather than attempting to manage a potentially complex security breach alone. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately detaining the individual and conducting a full interrogation without involving PFPA investigative authorities. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established investigative protocols, potentially compromising evidence and violating the individual's rights if not conducted by authorized investigators. It also places the officer in a position of conducting an investigation for which they may not have the specific training or legal authority, leading to procedural errors. Another incorrect approach is to simply observe the individual from a distance and wait for further instructions without taking any immediate action to secure the area or the individual. This is professionally unacceptable, as it fails to address the immediate security risk posed by a potentially compromised individual in a sensitive area. It demonstrates a lack of proactive security posture and could allow for further unauthorized access or dissemination of sensitive information, violating the core mission of PFPA. A third incorrect approach is to confront the individual aggressively and demand immediate answers without first securing the scene and notifying appropriate investigative bodies. This can lead to unnecessary escalation, potential harm to the officer or the individual, and the destruction of potential evidence. It also demonstrates a failure to follow established procedures for handling potential security threats, which emphasize controlled responses and the involvement of specialized units. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with immediate threat assessment and containment. This is followed by a systematic notification of relevant authorities and a controlled information gathering process. The PFPA police officer's role is to secure the situation and initiate the correct investigative chain of command, ensuring that all actions are compliant with PFPA regulations, federal law, and ethical law enforcement standards. This involves understanding when to act independently for immediate safety and when to defer to specialized units for in-depth investigation. Question 8. The assessment process reveals that a PFPA police officer, while on patrol near the Pentagon reservation in Arlington, Virginia, observes a vehicle speeding erratically and engaging in dangerous maneuvers that appear to be heading towards a public access road that borders a PFPA-controlled parking area. The vehicle then turns onto this public road, which is confirmed by GPS to be within the jurisdictional limits of Fairfax County, Virginia, and continues its erratic driving. What is the most appropriate course of action for the PFPA police officer in this scenario? Option A. Pursue the vehicle indefinitely into Fairfax County, Virginia, to apprehend the driver, regardless of jurisdictional boundaries, to prevent any potential future threat. Option B. Disengage from the situation entirely, as the vehicle has left PFPA jurisdiction and is now solely the responsibility of local law enforcement. Option C. Secure the immediate perimeter of the PFPA-controlled parking area if the erratic vehicle poses a direct and imminent threat to PFPA personnel or property, and immediately notify the Fairfax County Police Department to assume control of the situation on the public roadway. Option D. Attempt to stop the vehicle on the public road in Fairfax County, Virginia, using PFPA authority, and then contact local authorities for assistance. The correct answer is C. Secure the immediate perimeter of the PFPA-controlled parking area if the erratic vehicle poses a direct and imminent threat to PFPA personnel or property, and immediately notify the Fairfax County Police Department to assume control of the situation on the public roadway. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a critical scenario involving potential jurisdictional overreach and the need for precise adherence to the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA, police officers' authority and responsibilities within the Commonwealth of Virginia. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the officer to immediately discern the boundaries of their jurisdiction, understand the implications of acting outside those boundaries, and prioritize the safety of personnel and facilities under PFPA purview. Misinterpreting or exceeding jurisdictional limits can lead to legal complications, undermine interagency cooperation, and potentially compromise ongoing investigations or security operations. The correct approach involves prioritizing the immediate safety of individuals and property within PFPA jurisdiction, while simultaneously initiating the proper channels for external assistance. This means securing the immediate area if there is an imminent threat to PFPA-controlled facilities or personnel, and then promptly notifying and coordinating with the appropriate local law enforcement agency in Virginia, such as the Fairfax County Police Department, to handle the situation that has clearly moved beyond PFPA-established operational boundaries. This aligns with PFPA mission to protect Pentagon facilities and personnel, and respects the jurisdictional authority of local Virginia law enforcement. It also adheres to the principle of efficient and effective law enforcement by leveraging the resources and expertise of the agency best positioned to resolve the incident, acting solely on the assumption that the incident falls within PFPA jurisdiction without confirming the exact location and nature of the threat relative to PFPA boundaries is an incorrect approach. This could lead to an unlawful detention or arrest, creating significant legal liabilities for the officer and the PFPA. Furthermore, it demonstrates a failure to understand and respect the established jurisdictional lines between federal and local law enforcement agencies in Virginia, potentially damaging interagency relationships. Another incorrect approach is to immediately disengage and provide no assistance, even if PFPA personnel or facilities are indirectly affected, or if there is a clear and present danger that could spill over into PFPA areas. While jurisdictional boundaries are important, PFPA officers have a duty to protect and serve within their designated areas, and a complete lack of engagement when there is a potential threat to their mission or personnel is a dereliction of duty. This approach fails to consider the overarching security mandate of the PFPA. Finally, attempting to unilaterally resolve an incident that is clearly outside PFPA jurisdiction without proper coordination or handover to the relevant Virginia authorities is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the legal framework governing law enforcement operations and can lead to evidence being compromised, suspects escaping apprehension, or a chaotic and ineffective response. It prioritizes individual action over established protocols and interagency collaboration. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with an immediate assessment of the situation's impact on PFPA mission and personnel. This involves quickly determining if the incident is occurring within PFPA physical jurisdiction or poses a direct threat to PFPA assets or personnel. If there is any doubt, or if the incident clearly extends beyond PFPA boundaries, the next critical step is to identify and contact the appropriate local or state law enforcement agency in Virginia. This proactive communication and coordination ensure that the incident is handled by the agency with the primary legal authority and resources, while still allowing PFPA to fulfill its protective duties within its designated sphere of responsibility. Question 9. Analysis of a PFPA police officer observing an individual in a restricted area of the Pentagon attempting to access a personal electronic device in a manner that appears to be circumventing security protocols. What is the most appropriate and procedurally sound course of action for the officer to take in accordance with PFPA regulations and federal law? Option A. Directly confront the individual and demand immediate access to their personal electronic device for inspection. Option B. Ignore the suspicious activity, assuming it is a minor issue and not a significant security concern. Option C. Discuss the observed activity with other officers not directly involved in the situation to gauge their opinions. Option D. Immediately report the observed suspicious activity to their direct supervisor and the appropriate PFPA security command. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the observed suspicious activity to their direct supervisor and the appropriate PFPA security command. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a PFPA police officer due to the inherent tension between maintaining security protocols and respecting the privacy rights of individuals within a federal facility. The officer must exercise sound judgment to balance these competing interests, ensuring that any action taken is both lawful and ethically defensible, particularly when dealing with sensitive information or potential security risks. The specific context of a Pentagon facility amplifies the need for meticulous adherence to regulations and established procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and procedural approach. This means the officer should immediately report the observed suspicious activity to their direct supervisor and the appropriate PFPA security command. This approach is correct because it adheres to established PFPA standard operating procedures, SOP, for reporting security concerns and potential policy violations. It ensures that the situation is escalated to individuals with the authority and expertise to assess the risk, investigate appropriately, and take necessary action in accordance with federal law and PFPA directives. This upholds the principle of chain of command and ensures that investigations are conducted through official channels, minimizing the risk of unauthorized actions or breaches of protocol. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly confronting the individual and demanding access to their personal electronic device without a clear legal basis or supervisory directive. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established reporting procedures and could constitute an unlawful search or seizure, violating Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches. It also undermines the chain of command and could lead to an escalation of the situation without proper oversight. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the suspicious activity, assuming it is not a significant security concern. This is professionally unacceptable as it demonstrates a failure to uphold the officer's duty to protect PFPA personnel and facilities. It could allow a potential security threat or policy violation to go unaddressed, potentially compromising the safety and security of the Pentagon. This approach neglects the proactive security responsibilities inherent in the role. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the observed activity with other officers not directly involved in the situation or who are not part of the official investigation. This is professionally unacceptable as it constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could lead to the spread of unsubstantiated rumors or gossip, damaging the reputation of the individual and potentially compromising an ongoing investigation. It violates ethical principles of discretion and professional conduct. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols, legal mandates, and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Situational awareness, recognizing and assessing potential security risks or policy violations. 2. Procedural adherence, following established SOPs for reporting and investigation. 3. Legal compliance, ensuring all actions are within the bounds of federal law and PFPA regulations. 4. Chain of command, escalating issues to appropriate supervisory personnel. 5. Ethical conduct, maintaining confidentiality, professionalism, and respect for individual rights. Question 10. The review process indicates that the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA Police Department in the District of Columbia, is facing increased operational demands. To meet these demands, officers are frequently authorized to work overtime. A recent audit has highlighted a potential discrepancy between projected overtime expenditures and the allocated budget for the upcoming fiscal quarter. If the department's total allocated overtime budget for the quarter is $150,000, and historical data suggests that overtime hours typically average 1.5 times the regular hourly rate for officers, with an average regular hourly rate of $35,000 per officer, and the department anticipates needing an average of 500 overtime hours per week for the 13-week quarter. What is the projected total overtime cost for the quarter, and how does it compare to the allocated budget? Option A. The projected total overtime cost is $315,000, which exceeds the allocated budget of $150,000 by $165,000. Option B. Projected total overtime cost is $220,500, which exceeds the allocated budget of $150,000 by $70,500. Option C. The projected total overtime cost is $150,000, which exactly matches the allocated budget. Option D. The projected total overtime cost is $1,071,000, which significantly exceeds the allocated budget of $150,000. The correct answer is D. The projected total overtime cost is $1,071,000, which significantly exceeds the allocated budget of $150,000. Explanation. The review process indicates a need to assess the financial acumen and resource allocation skills of PFPA police officers, particularly in scenarios involving overtime management and budgetary adherence within the District of Columbia. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing operational needs with fiscal responsibility, a common tension in law enforcement. Mismanagement of overtime can lead to budget overruns, negatively impact morale, and potentially compromise officer well-being due to excessive work hours. Careful judgment is required to ensure that overtime is authorized judiciously and accounted for accurately, aligning with PFPA directives and applicable federal regulations governing overtime pay. The best approach involves a meticulous calculation of projected overtime costs based on historical data and anticipated operational demands, followed by a proactive comparison against the allocated budget. This method ensures that any potential shortfalls are identified early, allowing for informed decisions regarding resource allocation or the need to request additional funding. It directly addresses the PFPA requirement for fiscal accountability and efficient resource management. This approach is correct because it is grounded in the principles of sound financial management and adherence to budgetary constraints, which are implicitly required for effective public service operations under federal oversight. An incorrect approach would be to authorize overtime based solely on immediate operational needs, without a systematic review of the overall budget impact. This fails to account for the cumulative effect of overtime expenses and can lead to unexpected deficits. Ethically and regulatorily, this demonstrates a lack of foresight and responsibility in managing public funds. Another incorrect approach is to simply cap overtime at a fixed percentage of the base salary without considering the operational realities or the specific requirements of the PFPA mission. While seemingly cost-saving, this can lead to understaffing during critical periods, potentially compromising security and officer safety, which is a failure of the primary duty to protect. A final incorrect approach is to delay the reconciliation of overtime hours and associated costs until the end of the fiscal year. This practice prevents timely identification of budget issues and can result in significant, unaddressed overspending, violating principles of transparent financial reporting and responsible stewardship of resources. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes proactive financial planning, continuous monitoring of expenditures against budget, and a clear understanding of the operational impact of resource decisions. This involves utilizing available data to forecast needs, seeking approval for deviations from the plan, and maintaining transparent communication with financial oversight bodies. Question 11. Performance analysis shows that PFPA police officers responding to an incident at Pentagon facility must often make rapid decisions under pressure. In a scenario where an unauthorized individual is discovered attempting to access a restricted area, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for a PFPA police officer in Arlington, Virginia, to ensure both operational effectiveness and adherence to legal standards? Option A. Focus exclusively on apprehending the unauthorized individual, disregarding the need to secure the scene or identify other individuals present until after the apprehension is complete. Option B. Release all individuals from the scene after a brief visual assessment, assuming the incident is minor and no further investigation is required. Option C. Immediately detain and interrogate all individuals present to gather information about the attempted access, without initially securing the scene or advising them of their rights. Option D. Secure the immediate area to prevent further unauthorized access or evidence contamination. Then identify all individuals present and inform them of their rights if applicable, before commencing a lawful investigation. The correct answer is D. Secure the immediate area to prevent further unauthorized access or evidence contamination. Then identify all individuals present and inform them of their rights if applicable, before commencing a lawful investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the PFPA police officer to balance the immediate need for information gathering with the strict legal and ethical obligations surrounding the handling of sensitive information and the rights of individuals encountered during an investigation. Missteps can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and breaches of trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are lawful, ethical, and contribute effectively to the mission of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene to preserve potential evidence, and then, once the immediate threat is neutralized or controlled, initiating a lawful investigation. This includes identifying all individuals present, informing them of their rights as required by law, such as Miranda warnings if they are in custody and subject to interrogation, and documenting all observations and actions meticulously. This approach ensures that evidence is not contaminated, that individuals' rights are respected, and that the investigation proceeds on a solid legal foundation, aligning with the principles of due process and the PFPA mandate to protect personnel and facilities. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately interrogating all individuals present without first securing the scene or informing them of their rights. This is a regulatory failure because it risks contaminating the scene, potentially destroying crucial evidence before it can be properly collected and analyzed. It is also an ethical failure as it disregards the fundamental rights of individuals, potentially leading to inadmissible evidence and undermining the integrity of the investigation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on securing the scene and delaying any interaction with individuals present, even after the immediate threat has subsided. While scene security is vital, prolonged inaction without attempting to identify witnesses or potential suspects can lead to the loss of valuable, time-sensitive information. This can be seen as a failure to effectively execute the investigative duties mandated by the PFPA, potentially hindering the overall mission. A third incorrect approach is to release all individuals from the scene without proper identification or documentation, assuming no further action is needed. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It bypasses the critical step of identifying all parties involved, who may be witnesses, victims, or perpetrators. This lack of documentation can severely hamper subsequent investigative efforts and prevent the PFPA from fulfilling its protective responsibilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that prioritizes immediate safety and scene preservation, followed by lawful information gathering and evidence collection. This involves a continuous assessment of the situation, adherence to established protocols and legal requirements, such as those governing searches, seizures, and interrogations, and meticulous documentation of all actions. When encountering individuals, officers must be prepared to inform them of their rights as dictated by law and agency policy, ensuring that all investigative steps are both effective and legally sound. Question 12. The control framework reveals that PFPA Police Officer Miller is responding to a report of unauthorized access to a restricted area within a PFPA-controlled facility in Fairfax County, Virginia. Upon arrival, Officer Miller observes an individual matching the description provided, attempting to conceal a small, unmarked electronic device. The individual appears nervous and evasive. Considering the immediate need to secure the facility and gather information, which of the following actions best upholds the PFPA mission and the legal requirements of Virginia? Option A. Allow the individual to leave the premises with the device, documenting their appearance and the item's description for a later, less urgent review by the investigative team. Option B. Question the individual extensively about their presence and the device without advising them of their rights, attempting to elicit a confession or incriminating statements. Option C. Conduct a thorough, warrantless search of the individual's person and any containers they possess to immediately ascertain the nature of the device and any potential threat. Option D. Secure the individual and the device, then immediately contact the PFPA Investigative Division and a supervisor for guidance on further investigation and evidence handling. The correct answer is D. Secure the individual and the device, then immediately contact the PFPA Investigative Division and a supervisor for guidance on further investigation and evidence handling. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a PFPA police officer, Officer Miller, is tasked with responding to a potential security breach at a PFPA-controlled facility within the Commonwealth of Virginia. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for security and information gathering with the established legal and procedural requirements governing law enforcement interactions with civilians, particularly concerning the handling of sensitive information and potential evidence. Officer Miller must navigate the complexities of probable cause, search and seizure laws, and the chain of custody, all while operating under the specific directives and legal precedents applicable in Virginia. The professional challenge is to act decisively to protect the facility without compromising constitutional rights or departmental policy, which could lead to legal repercussions for the officer and the PFPA. The best professional approach involves securing the area and the individual, then immediately notifying the appropriate PFPA investigative unit and seeking legal counsel or guidance from a supervisor regarding the next steps for evidence collection and questioning. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the integrity of the investigation and the rights of the individual. By involving specialized investigative units and legal advisors, Officer Miller ensures that any subsequent actions, such as searches or interrogations, are conducted in strict accordance with Virginia law and PFPA policy, particularly concerning probable cause and the proper handling of potential evidence. This adheres to the principles of due process and maintains the admissibility of any gathered information in potential legal proceedings. An approach that involves immediate, warrantless search of the individual's personal belongings without establishing probable cause or exigent circumstances is professionally unacceptable. This violates the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, as applied in Virginia, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Another unacceptable approach is to release the individual and the potentially compromised item without further documentation or investigation, as this could allow a security threat to persist or evidence to be lost, undermining the PFPA protective mission and potentially violating departmental procedures for incident reporting and evidence preservation. Furthermore, attempting to conduct a detailed interrogation without proper legal advisement or adherence to Miranda rights, if applicable, would also be a significant ethical and legal failure, jeopardizing the investigation and exposing the officer to disciplinary action. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate threat and securing the scene. This is followed by a clear understanding of jurisdictional laws and departmental policies. The next step involves consulting with supervisors or specialized units to ensure all actions are legally sound and procedurally compliant. Documentation of all observations and actions is paramount throughout the process. Question 13. Investigation of an anonymous tip alleging a Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA, employee is sharing sensitive facility access codes with unauthorized individuals. What is the most appropriate initial course of action for a PFPA supervisor? Option A. Immediately detain the employee for questioning and search their personal belongings without further investigation or legal consultation, based solely on the anonymous tip. Option B. Initiate a discreet internal inquiry by reviewing access logs and surveillance footage related to the alleged employee, while simultaneously consulting with PFPA legal counsel and the Office of Special Investigations (OSI) to determine the next steps based on preliminary findings. Option C. Conduct broad, unprompted interviews with all personnel working in proximity to the alleged employee to gauge general sentiment and look for suspicious behavior. Option D. Disregard the anonymous tip as unsubstantiated and continue with standard security patrols, assuming no immediate threat exists. Correct answer is B. Initiate a discreet internal inquiry by reviewing access logs and surveillance footage related to the alleged employee, while simultaneously consulting with PFPA legal counsel and the Office of Special Investigations (OSI) to determine the next steps based on preliminary findings. Explanation: investigation of a potential insider threat at Pentagon Force Protection Agency PFPA facility presents a significant professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of the information and the critical infrastructure involved. The need for swift, decisive action must be balanced with the imperative to uphold individual rights and adhere to strict legal and procedural protocols. Missteps can compromise national security, damage morale, and lead to legal repercussions. The best approach involves a coordinated effort that prioritizes information gathering and verification through established channels, while simultaneously ensuring the subject's rights are protected. This means initiating a discreet internal inquiry, leveraging PFPA-established investigative procedures, and liaising with relevant security and legal counsel. This approach ensures that any actions taken are based on credible evidence, are legally sound, and are conducted in a manner that minimizes disruption and potential harm to innocent parties. It aligns with the PFPA mandate to protect personnel and facilities while respecting due process. An approach that involves immediate, Unilateral detention and interrogation without sufficient corroborating evidence or proper legal authorization is professionally unacceptable. This bypasses established investigative protocols, potentially violates the subject's rights, and could lead to the premature dismissal of a valid threat or the wrongful accusation of an innocent individual. Such actions undermine the integrity of the investigative process and could expose the PFPA to legal liability. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore the initial tip due to its anonymous nature and rely solely on routine security patrols. While anonymous tips require careful vetting, dismissing them outright without any form of preliminary assessment or documentation is a failure to exercise due diligence. This could allow a genuine threat to materialize, jeopardizing the safety of personnel and the security of the facility. It demonstrates a lack of proactive security posture. Finally, an approach that involves widespread, indiscriminate questioning of all personnel based on a vague suspicion is also professionally unsound. This creates an atmosphere of distrust and fear, negatively impacts morale, and is an inefficient use of resources. It also risks alienating the very personnel whose cooperation might be crucial in identifying a genuine threat. This approach fails to target the investigation effectively and can be counterproductive. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with assessing the credibility and nature of the information received. This involves consulting with supervisors and legal advisors, identifying relevant PFPA policies and procedures, and developing a phased investigative plan. The plan should outline steps for information gathering, evidence collection, and potential actions, always with a focus on legality, proportionality, and the protection of rights. Continuous evaluation of the evolving situation and adaptation of the investigative strategy are also critical. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that law enforcement officers often face situations requiring a delicate balance between security protocols and individual welfare. In the context of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA, operating within Maryland, if a PFPA police officer observes an individual exhibiting unusual behavior and seemingly loitering in an area with restricted access, which of the following initial responses best aligns with professional standards and legal requirements? Option A. Ignore the individual, assuming they are not a threat and do not require intervention, to avoid potential confrontation. Option B. Approach the individual cautiously, attempt to engage in calm communication to understand their presence and intentions, and assess for any signs of distress or immediate threat. Option C. Immediately detain the individual based on their presence in a restricted area and their unusual behavior, pending further investigation. Option D. Summon backup and prepare for a forceful apprehension, without attempting any initial communication or assessment of the situation. The correct answer is B. Approach the individual cautiously, attempt to engage in calm communication to understand their presence and intentions, and assess for any signs of distress or immediate threat. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a PFPA police officer in Maryland due to the inherent tension between maintaining security and respecting individual rights, particularly when dealing with individuals who may be experiencing distress or confusion. The need for swift action to ensure safety must be balanced against the requirement to act lawfully and ethically, avoiding unnecessary escalation or infringement of liberties. Careful judgment is required to assess the situation accurately and choose a course of action that is both effective and legally sound within the PFPA operational framework and Maryland law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves de-escalation and a welfare check, prioritizing the individual's well-being and safety while gathering information. This approach acknowledges the potential for a medical or mental health crisis, which is a common underlying cause of unusual behavior. By attempting to communicate and assess the situation calmly, the officer respects the individual's dignity and avoids premature assumptions. This aligns with PFPA guidelines that emphasize a community policing model, focusing on service and protection, and Maryland law, which generally requires reasonable suspicion for detention or intervention beyond a brief inquiry. The goal is to resolve the situation with the least intrusive means necessary, potentially connecting the individual with appropriate support services if needed, rather than immediately resorting to enforcement actions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately detaining the individual based solely on their presence in a restricted area without further investigation. This fails to consider that the individual might have a legitimate, albeit unknown, reason for being there or may be disoriented. Such immediate detention could violate the individual's rights against unlawful restraint under Maryland law and PFPA policy, which mandates reasonable suspicion for such actions. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the individual, assuming they pose no threat. While avoiding unnecessary confrontation is important, failing to investigate a potentially compromised security perimeter or an individual exhibiting unusual behavior could lead to a significant security breach or a missed opportunity to assist someone in need. This inaction could be seen as a dereliction of duty if the individual later causes harm, or if their presence indicates a larger security vulnerability. A third incorrect approach is to immediately call for backup and prepare for a forceful apprehension without attempting any communication or assessment. This escalates the situation unnecessarily and assumes a hostile intent that may not exist. It risks alienating the individual, potentially provoking a defensive reaction, and is contrary to de-escalation principles emphasized in law enforcement training and PFPA operational directives. It also bypasses the opportunity to determine if the individual requires assistance rather than enforcement. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a tiered approach to intervention. First, observe and assess the situation from a safe distance, looking for specific indicators of threat or distress. Second, attempt non-confrontational communication to understand the individual's intentions or needs. Third, if communication is unsuccessful or indicates a potential threat or need for assistance, involve appropriate resources, e.g., additional officers, specialized units, while continuing to de-escalate. Throughout the process, officers must remain aware of their legal authority and ethical obligations, documenting all actions and observations. Question 15. The investigation demonstrates a situation where a potential security breach at a facility under the Pentagon Force Protection Agency's PFPA purview may involve personnel and information that also fall under the jurisdiction of a separate federal law enforcement agency. PFPA officers have gathered initial information and some physical evidence at the scene. What is the most appropriate course of action for PFPA officers to ensure the investigation proceeds legally and effectively within the established regulatory framework of the PFPA? Option A. Secure the scene and wait for instructions from a higher PFPA authority without actively seeking clarification on jurisdictional matters from legal counsel or other agencies. Option B. Continue to gather all available evidence and conduct interviews independently, assuming PFPA has primary jurisdiction due to the incident occurring on its protected property, and share findings later. Option C. Forward all collected evidence and initial reports directly to the separate federal law enforcement agency without consulting PFPA legal counsel, assuming they will take the lead. Option D. Immediately consult with PFPA legal counsel and the designated lead federal investigative agency to clarify jurisdictional responsibilities and agree on evidence handling and information sharing protocols before proceeding further. The correct answer is D. Immediately consult with PFPA legal counsel and the designated lead federal investigative agency to clarify jurisdictional responsibilities and agree on evidence handling and information sharing protocols before proceeding further. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a complex scenario involving potential jurisdictional overlap and the need for precise adherence to established protocols within the Pentagon Force Protection Agency (PFPA) jurisdiction. The challenge lies in accurately identifying the primary investigative authority and ensuring that evidence is collected and processed in a manner that respects all applicable regulations, particularly concerning the handling of sensitive information and the rights of individuals involved. Missteps in this area could compromise the integrity of the investigation and lead to legal challenges. The best approach involves a thorough understanding of PFPA-established interagency agreements and jurisdictional boundaries. This means proactively consulting with the relevant PFPA legal counsel and the designated lead investigative agency to confirm the scope of authority and the correct procedures for evidence transfer and information sharing. This ensures that all actions taken are legally sound and align with the PFPA mandate to protect Pentagon personnel and facilities. By prioritizing clear communication and adherence to established protocols, the integrity of the investigation is maintained, and potential legal challenges are mitigated. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with an investigation based solely on assumptions about jurisdiction without formal confirmation. This could lead to actions that overstep PFPA authority or fail to properly involve the agency with primary jurisdiction, potentially rendering collected evidence inadmissible. Another incorrect approach is to unilaterally share sensitive information with external agencies without proper authorization or adherence to PFPA data sharing policies. This violates privacy regulations and established security protocols, jeopardizing the investigation and potentially exposing classified information. Finally, failing to document all communications and decisions regarding jurisdictional matters creates a lack of accountability and can hinder future review or legal proceedings. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes verification and consultation. This involves 1. Identifying the nature of the incident and the potential agencies involved. 2. Consulting PFPA directives and interagency agreements to understand jurisdictional parameters. 3. Proactively engaging with PFPA legal counsel and the suspected primary investigative agency for clarification and guidance. 4. Documenting all communications and decisions meticulously. 5. Adhering strictly to established protocols for evidence handling and information sharing. Question 16. Assessment of a PFPA police officer's response to a suspicious package and an individual exhibiting unusual behavior near a restricted Pentagon access point in Arlington, Virginia, requires careful consideration of stakeholder interests and legal obligations. Which of the following actions best upholds the officer's duty and adheres to established protocols? Option A. Detain the individual and conduct a thorough, on-the-spot interrogation to ascertain their intentions and knowledge of the suspicious package. Option B. Attempt to open and examine the suspicious package oneself to determine its contents, while keeping the individual under observation. Option C. Advise the individual to leave the area and dispose of the suspicious package if it appears harmless, then continue routine patrol. Option D. Secure the immediate area, establish a perimeter, and immediately contact PFPA Command and the PFPA Criminal Investigations Division to report the situation and request appropriate specialized response teams. Correct answer is D. Secure the immediate area, establish a perimeter, and immediately contact PFPA Command and the PFPA Criminal Investigations Division to report the situation and request appropriate specialized response teams. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the PFPA police officer to balance the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual rights and maintain the integrity of an investigation. The officer must act decisively while adhering to strict protocols, understanding that a misstep could compromise evidence, violate constitutional rights, or lead to disciplinary action. The pressure of a potential security threat adds urgency, making careful judgment paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and immediately notifying the appropriate investigative authorities and legal counsel. This approach is correct because it prioritizes the preservation of potential evidence and ensures that all actions taken are in accordance with established legal frameworks and PFPA policies. By involving specialized units and legal advisors early, the officer ensures that subsequent investigative steps, including any potential questioning or evidence collection, are conducted lawfully and ethically, respecting the rights of all individuals involved and maintaining the chain of custody. This aligns with the principles of due process and the lawful conduct of investigations mandated by federal law and PFPA directives. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately interrogating the individual without proper legal advisement or notification of investigative units. This is ethically and legally flawed because it risks violating the individual's Miranda rights, potentially rendering any obtained statements inadmissible in court. It bypasses established investigative procedures and the expertise of specialized personnel, undermining the integrity of the investigation. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the individual and the suspicious item without further investigation or documentation. This is professionally unacceptable as it ignores a potential security threat and fails to uphold the officer's duty to investigate suspicious circumstances. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and could have severe consequences if the item or individual posed a genuine risk. A third incorrect approach is to collect and examine the suspicious item independently, without involving specialized units like Explosive Ordnance Disposal (AUD) or the PFPA Criminal Investigations Division. This is dangerous and procedurally incorrect. The officer may lack the necessary training and equipment to safely handle potentially hazardous materials. An independent examination could contaminate evidence or compromise the investigation. It also deviates from established protocols for handling sensitive situations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with threat assessment and scene security. This is followed by immediate notification of relevant authorities and legal counsel to ensure all subsequent actions are legally sound and procedurally compliant. Documentation of all observations and actions is crucial. This framework emphasizes adherence to established protocols, respect for individual rights, and collaboration with specialized units to achieve a lawful and effective outcome. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that Pentagon Force Protection Agency (PFPA) police officers may encounter situations requiring immediate action that could impact subsequent investigations. In a scenario where a PFPA officer discovers an individual in distress, exhibiting signs of a serious medical emergency, within an area that may also be a potential crime scene, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take to balance the duty to preserve life with the need to maintain the integrity of a potential investigation within the Pentagon reservation? Option A. Immediately secure the entire area as a crime scene and await the arrival of specialized investigative units before providing any medical assistance. Option B. Administer extensive medical aid, moving the individual significantly and altering the scene without documenting initial observations or attempting to preserve evidence. Option C. Disregard the situation, assuming it is outside the officer's immediate responsibility or will be handled by another entity. Option D. Provide immediate medical assistance to the distressed individual while taking minimal, necessary steps to preserve the immediate vicinity of the individual's condition and promptly reporting the situation to PFPA investigative units and supervisors. Correct answer is D. Provide immediate medical assistance to the distressed individual while taking minimal, necessary steps to preserve the immediate vicinity of the individual's condition and promptly reporting the situation to PFPA investigative units and supervisors. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pentagon Force Protection Agency (PFPA) police officer due to the inherent tension between maintaining security protocols and responding to emergent, potentially life-threatening situations. The officer must exercise sound judgment to balance immediate safety concerns with established procedures for evidence preservation and reporting, all within the context of a high-security environment. The need for swift action in a medical emergency must be weighed against the potential compromise of a crime scene. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves prioritizing life safety while taking immediate, minimal steps to preserve the integrity of the scene. This means rendering aid to the injured individual without unnecessarily disturbing potential evidence. The officer should then immediately notify appropriate PFPA investigative units and supervisors, clearly articulating the situation and the actions taken. This approach is correct because it aligns with the PFPA core mission of safeguarding personnel and facilities, which includes the paramount duty to preserve life. Furthermore, it adheres to general law enforcement principles that dictate immediate medical assistance takes precedence over scene preservation when life is at risk, while still acknowledging the importance of subsequent investigation. The prompt notification ensures that specialized units can respond efficiently and mitigate any potential evidence compromise. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately securing the entire area as a crime scene and waiting for specialized units to arrive before rendering any aid. This is ethically and professionally unacceptable because it prioritizes property or potential evidence over human life, violating the fundamental duty to assist those in peril. It also fails to acknowledge the PFPA responsibility to protect personnel. Another incorrect approach is to provide extensive medical aid, moving the individual extensively and potentially contaminating the scene without any attempt to document or preserve its initial state. While life-saving is critical, a complete disregard for the scene's integrity, without at least noting initial observations or taking minimal steps to prevent further disturbance, can hinder subsequent investigations and is therefore professionally deficient. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the situation entirely, assuming it is outside the officer's purview or that another agency will handle it. This is a dereliction of duty and a failure to uphold the oath of a PFPA police officer, which includes responding to all incidents within their jurisdiction and scope of authority to ensure the safety and security of the Pentagon reservation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate life threats, followed by the preservation of critical information and scene integrity, and finally, clear and timely communication with relevant authorities. This involves a rapid assessment of the situation, a clear understanding of one's immediate responsibilities, and the ability to adapt established protocols to emergent circumstances while remaining within legal and ethical boundaries. Question 18. Regulatory review indicates that a Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA, police officer, while responding to a routine call at a PFPA facility in Arlington, Virginia, discovers a personal laptop left unattended in a common area. The officer has no immediate information suggesting the laptop is involved in criminal activity, but recognizes its potential as a source of information relevant to ongoing PFPA operations or security matters. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the PFPA police officer in this situation? Option A. Seize the personal laptop and immediately attempt to access its contents to determine if it contains any relevant information. Option B. Leave the laptop at the scene, assuming it is personal property and not related to official duties or security concerns. Option C. Secure the laptop and immediately notify PFPA investigative or legal authorities for guidance on proper handling and potential examination. Option D. Contact the individual's supervisor directly to inquire about the laptop and its contents before taking any further action. The correct answer is C. Secure the laptop and immediately notify PFPA investigative or legal authorities for guidance on proper handling and potential examination. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical obligations governing the handling of sensitive information within the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA. A PFPA police officer must act decisively, but also adhere to established protocols to maintain the integrity of investigations and protect classified or sensitive data. Failure to do so could compromise an ongoing investigation, violate privacy rights, or lead to disciplinary action and legal repercussions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the device and notifying the appropriate PFPA investigative or legal authorities. This approach is correct because it acknowledges the potential evidentiary value of the device while respecting the established legal framework for accessing and analyzing such information. PFPA police officers are bound by federal regulations and agency policy, which mandate that unauthorized access to electronic devices is prohibited. By securing the device and reporting it, the officer ensures that any subsequent examination is conducted by authorized personnel, under proper legal authority, such as a warrant or consent, and in compliance with all relevant federal laws and PFPA directives concerning evidence handling and digital forensics. This upholds the principles of due process and lawful evidence collection. Incorrect approaches analysis. Seizing the personal laptop and immediately attempting to access its contents without proper authorization or a warrant is professionally unacceptable. This approach violates federal laws protecting electronic privacy and Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. It bypasses established investigative procedures and could render any discovered evidence inadmissible in court. Ignoring the laptop and leaving it at the scene without securing it is also professionally unacceptable. This failure to secure potential evidence could compromise an investigation, allowing crucial information to be lost, tampered with, or destroyed. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and adherence to basic law enforcement principles of evidence preservation. Contacting the individual's supervisor directly to inquire about the laptop's contents before involving PFPA investigative or legal channels is professionally unacceptable. This circumvents proper investigative protocols, potentially violates the individual's privacy rights, and could create an appearance of impropriety or bias in the investigation. It also bypasses the expertise of specialized units trained in handling sensitive digital evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal mandates and agency policy. This involves 1. Recognizing the potential significance of evidence. 2. Understanding the legal boundaries for seizure and examination of electronic devices. 3. Following established protocols for evidence handling and reporting. 4. Consulting with supervisors or specialized units when unsure about proper procedure. The primary goal is to preserve the integrity of the investigation and uphold legal and ethical standards. Question 19. Consider a scenario where a PFPA police officer, while on duty within the Pentagon reservation in Arlington, Virginia, observes an individual fleeing from a building within the reservation and then exiting the reservation onto a public street. The individual is carrying what appears to be stolen property from within the Pentagon. What is the most appropriate course of action for the PFPA police officer? Option A. Pursue the individual off the Pentagon reservation and attempt to apprehend them, initiating a full investigation as if the crime occurred entirely within their jurisdiction. Option B. Ignore the individual once they have left the Pentagon reservation, as the incident is no longer within the PFPA primary jurisdiction. Option C. Immediately notify the local Arlington County Police Department and provide them with all relevant details of the observed fleeing individual and suspected stolen property, while remaining within the Pentagon reservation unless directed otherwise by the local agency. Option D. Attempt to conduct a preliminary investigation and detain the individual on the public street without immediately involving the Arlington County Police Department to gather more information before contacting them. The correct answer is C. Immediately notify the local Arlington County Police Department and provide them with all relevant details of the observed fleeing individual and suspected stolen property, while remaining within the Pentagon reservation unless directed otherwise by the local agency. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the PFPA police officer to balance immediate public safety concerns with the legal rights of individuals and the specific jurisdictional authority of the PFPA. Misinterpreting or exceeding jurisdictional boundaries can lead to legal repercussions, undermine public trust, and compromise the effectiveness of law enforcement operations within the Pentagon's protected areas. The officer must make a rapid, informed decision under pressure, considering the nuances of federal law enforcement authority within a designated federal enclave. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the PFPA police officer recognizing their jurisdictional limits and acting within them. This means understanding that while they have authority within the Pentagon reservation, their jurisdiction does not automatically extend to investigating crimes occurring entirely outside of this designated area, even if the suspect is fleeing from within. The correct approach is to immediately notify the appropriate local or state law enforcement agency that has primary jurisdiction over the area where the offense is believed to have occurred. This ensures that the investigation is handled by the agency with the legal authority and resources to pursue it effectively, while the PFPA officer maintains proper jurisdictional conduct. This aligns with federal law enforcement principles of respecting territorial jurisdiction and interagency cooperation, as outlined in various federal statutes governing law enforcement authority on federal property, and the coordination between federal and local law enforcement agencies. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is for the PFPA police officer to pursue the suspect and attempt to make an arrest outside of the Pentagon reservation. This action would constitute an overreach of jurisdictional authority. PFPA officers are granted law enforcement powers primarily within the Pentagon reservation, while there may be limited circumstances for hot pursuit. Initiating a full investigation and apprehension outside of their designated jurisdiction without proper coordination with the local agency is a violation of jurisdictional boundaries and could lead to the suppression of any evidence obtained. Another incorrect approach is for the PFPA police officer to ignore the incident, because it occurred outside their primary jurisdiction. While jurisdictional limits are critical, PFPA officers have a duty to protect the Pentagon and its personnel. If the incident, even if occurring off reservation, poses a direct and immediate threat to the Pentagon or its personnel, the officer should still take appropriate action to mitigate that threat and then coordinate with the relevant jurisdiction. Simply ignoring it abdicates responsibility and potentially allows a threat to persist. A third incorrect approach is for the PFPA police officer to attempt to conduct a full investigation and arrest outside of their jurisdiction without consulting or involving the local law enforcement agency. This bypasses established protocols for interagency cooperation and can create confusion, jurisdictional disputes, and potentially compromise the investigation. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the collaborative nature of modern law enforcement and the importance of respecting the primary authority of local agencies. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and adhering to jurisdictional boundaries. This involves 1. Rapidly assessing the situation to determine if the incident falls within their immediate jurisdiction. 2. If the incident is outside their primary jurisdiction, identifying the relevant local or state law enforcement agency. 3. Immediately contacting and coordinating with the appropriate agency, providing all pertinent information. 4. Taking immediate action to preserve life or prevent imminent harm if necessary, while awaiting the arrival of the jurisdictional agency. 5. Documenting all actions and communications thoroughly. This systematic approach ensures legal compliance, effective law enforcement, and fosters positive interagency relationships. Question 20. Upon reviewing the pay stubs for a Pentagon Force Protection Agency, PFPA police officer who earns an annual salary of $65,000 and worked 48 hours in a particular workweek, what is the correct overtime pay for that week, assuming a standard 40-hour workweek and adherence to the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, for federal civilian employees in the District of Columbia? Option A, $245.19. Option B, $216.38. Option C, $182.00. Option D, $163.46. The correct answer is A, $245.19. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a PFPA police officer by requiring the accurate calculation of overtime pay based on specific federal regulations and departmental policies, while also considering the potential for misinterpretation of pay scales and duty hours. The officer must demonstrate a thorough understanding of the governing pay structures to ensure fair compensation and compliance with federal labor laws applicable to Department of Defense civilian employees, which PFPA officers fall under. Failure to accurately calculate overtime can lead to financial discrepancies, employee grievances, and potential legal challenges against the agency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously applying the overtime pay calculation formula as stipulated by the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, and relevant Department of Defense, DoD directives for civilian employees. This means identifying the employee's regular rate of pay and multiplying it by 1.5 for all hours worked over 40 in a workweek. For instance, if an officer's annual salary is $60,000 and they work 2,080 hours per year, their regular hourly rate is $60,000/2,080 equals $28.85. If they work 45 hours in a given week, the overtime pay for that week would be /5 hours times $28.85 times 1.5 equals 5 times $43. 275 equals $216. 38 . This approach ensures adherence to federal wage and hour laws, promotes transparency in compensation, and upholds the ethical obligation to provide accurate pay for services rendered. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply multiply the total hours worked by the regular hourly rate, ignoring the overtime premium. This fails to comply with the FLSA requirement for time-and-a-half pay for overtime hours, leading to underpayment and a violation of federal law. Another incorrect approach would be to use a flat rate for all hours worked, regardless of whether they are regular or overtime hours, or to apply a different, non-standard multiplier without explicit regulatory authorization. This also violates the FLSA and could result in significant financial penalties and damage to the agency's reputation. A further incorrect approach would be to round down the calculated overtime pay to the nearest dollar amount to simplify calculations or to save agency funds. This constitutes a direct violation of wage laws, as employees are entitled to their full, accurately calculated overtime compensation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach overtime pay calculations by first identifying the applicable federal regulations, e.g., FLSA, and any specific DoD or PFPA internal policies governing civilian employee compensation. They should then determine the employee's regular rate of pay, which may require understanding how base salary, locality pay, and other forms of compensation factor into the calculation. The next step is to accurately track all hours worked and identify those that qualify as overtime. Finally, the overtime premium should be applied using the legally mandated multiplier, typically 1.5, to the regular rate for all qualifying overtime hours. This systematic, regulation-driven process ensures accuracy, fairness, and legal compliance.